Keanu Reeves stepped into the polished, minimalist showroom of Arch Motorcycle, the very embodiment of his lifelong passion for motorcycles. This wasn't just a business venture, it was his dream brought to life. Every detail of the space, from the pristine display of handcrafted bikes to the quiet hum of ambience, spoke of dedication and pride. To Keanu, this wasn't merely a store. It was a sanctuary for enthusiasts who shared his love for the art of engineering and design. But on this particular afternoon, Keanu wasn't there to admire the polished chrome or discuss specs with potential customers. He was there for a more pressing reason. Rumors had reached him, disheartening whispers about his employees' attitudes toward customers. Keanu couldn't ignore it. Respect was a cornerstone of his vision for Arch Motorcycle, and he needed to see for himself if those values were being upheld. Dressed in a simple leather jacket and jeans, blending seamlessly into the atmosphere, he decided to remain incognito and let the shop run as usual. He would observe, quietly, without tipping off his presence. At the counter, two employees, Jake and Mark, were leaning back in their chairs, laughing loudly. The sound bounced off the walls of the otherwise tranquil showroom, but there was something unsettling about their tone. It wasn't joy. It was mockery. Keanu's ears perked up as he wandered between the bikes, his eyes subtly darting toward the duo. "Did you see that guy earlier?" Jake sneered, shaking his head with a smug grin. The guy couldn't even figure out how to start the bike. What a joke. Mark, always quick to join in, chuckled and added, "Yeah." And then he asked for a custom-built bike. Can you imagine? What's he going to do with that? Use it as a prop to impress his buddies at a backyard cookout. Their words, laced with cruelty, hung in the air. Keanu felt his chest tighten. It wasn't just their words that stung. It was the complete lack of regard for the customers who walked through those doors. These weren't the principles Arch Motorcycle was built on. The shop was supposed to be a haven, a place where beginners and seasoned riders alike could feel welcomed and respected. Yet here were two of his employees, openly deriding the very people they were meant to serve. Keanu didn't react outwardly. His face remained calm, his demeanor composed. But inside, he was troubled. As he continued to walk through the showroom, examining the bikes with quiet intensity, his thoughts raced. How had things gone so wrong? How could a space built on passion and respect have devolved into this? Keanu's silent observations continued as he moved closer to the counter. Jake and Mark, still oblivious to his identity, seemed emboldened by their ignorance. When they noticed him lingering near a sleek custom model, their mocking shifted focus. "Hey," Mark called out, his tone sharp and dismissive. "Are you looking for something? Or just killing time?" Jake chimed in, smirking. "Yeah, if you're not sure what you want, we've got some beginner bikes in the back. Might be more your speed." Keanu turned to face them, his expression neutral, his eyes piercing. "I'm just looking," he replied, his voice steady and calm. "But I know exactly what I'm looking for." His response didn't deter them. If anything, it seemed to spur Jake and Mark on, their arrogance preventing them from sensing the shift in the air. They exchanged smug glances and continued their chatter, confident that they could size up the quiet man in the leather jacket. But Keanu had heard enough. He stepped closer to the counter, his movements deliberate. The casual confidence radiating from Jake and Mark began to waver under his unflinching gaze. "You're quick to judge people," Keanu said, his voice calm but carrying undeniable weight. "Quick to decide what they know, what they're worth, based on nothing more than a glance. Do you ever stop to think about the person standing in front of you?" The laughter stopped. Jake and Mark exchanged a look, their bravado faltering. Keanu's words were a mirror, forcing them to confront the ugliness of their behavior. "Listen," Mark said defensively, trying to shrug it off. "We were just joking around. It's no big deal." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression unwavering. "It is a big deal. Respect isn't something you give." Jake and Mark were growing visibly uncomfortable. Keanu could see the questions flickering behind their eyes. Who was this man? And why did he care so much? But before they could ask, Keanu answered. "I built this place," he said simply. "Every bike, every detail. It's here because I wanted a space where people could feel valued. And that includes the customers you've been mocking. The realization hit them like a freight train. Their eyes widened as they finally recognized him, not as just another customer, but as Keanu Reeves, the man who had envisioned Arch Motorcycle, the man who had made it a reality. The weight of their disrespect crashed down on them. Both men scrambled to apologize, their voices stumbling over themselves in their guilt. "We didn't know," Jake muttered. "I mean, we're sorry. Really, we didn't mean." Keanu held up a hand to stop him. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about the people who walk through that door. Treating them with respect. No matter who they are, that's what matters. That's how you grow, not just as employees, but as people." His words lingered in the air long after he left. Jake and Mark, left alone in the now quiet showroom, were forced to reflect. They hadn't just been called out, they'd been given a chance to be better. Later that day, a nervous customer stepped into the showroom. Jake and Mark, now humbled, greeted him with genuine warmth. They took the time to answer his questions, ensuring he felt valued. As the customer left, smiling with his new bike, Jake and Mark exchanged a glance. This time, there was no mockery, no arrogance, just a quiet understanding. Keanu's lesson stayed with them. It wasn't about selling bikes. It was about creating an experience rooted in respect and dignity. And in that moment, both men realized they weren't just better employees, they were becoming better people. As Keanu wandered closer to the counter, the quiet hum of the showroom was broken by Mark, who noticed him for the first time. With a hint of irritation in his voice, Mark leaned forward, his gaze sharp and dismissive. "Hey," he called out, a forced smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "Are you looking for something? Or just killing time?" Before Keanu could respond, Jake picked up on Mark's tone and smirked. "Yeah," he chimed in, his words dripping with condescension. "If you're lost, we've got some beginner bikes in the back. Might be more your speed." The words weren't just casual, they were calculated to belittle. They hung in the air, cold and cutting, a challenge wrapped in mockery. But Keanu didn't react the way they expected. He didn't falter or flash irritation. Instead, he turned to face them, his calm and steady presence as unyielding as steel. "I'm just looking," he said, his voice deliberate, even measured. "But I know exactly what I want." The air in the room shifted almost imperceptibly, but Keanu could feel it. His calm composure unsettled the two employees. Though they wouldn't admit it, there was something about his demeanor, an unspoken authority that seemed to demand respect, even if they didn't yet understand why. For a brief moment, Jake and Mark exchanged glances, their smug grins faltering ever so slightly. But arrogance is a stubborn thing, and it kept them from backing down. Mark leaned back in his chair, a defensive laugh escaping his lips as though trying to shake off the discomfort. Jake, ever the louder of the two, decided to double down. "You know," he said, gesturing toward a sleek bike in the corner. "Most people who walk in here don't really know what they're looking at. Are you one of those guys?" Keanu didn't answer immediately. He let the silence linger, letting them sit in their own words. His gaze moved over the bikes, deliberate and thoughtful, before returning to meet Jake's eyes. "I've been around bikes my whole life," he said simply, his voice unwavering. "I know exactly what I'm looking at." Keanu's words carried a weight that was hard to ignore. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. His tone wasn't confrontational, but it held a quiet strength, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. For the first time, Jake and Mark felt something they weren't used to: doubt. Jake shifted his weight on the stool, suddenly feeling less sure of himself. Mark, who had always prided himself on being tough and unflappable, crossed his arms and tried to maintain his bravado. "Well," he muttered, "if you know what you're looking for, let us know. We'll help when you're ready." The mockery wasn't entirely gone, but it was softer now, almost hesitant. There was a tension in the air that neither of them could quite place. They didn't yet know who this man was, but there was something about him that made them uneasy, something they couldn't laugh off as easily as they had with others. Keanu continued to browse the showroom, his movements deliberate, his focus unshaken. But he wasn't just examining the bikes. He was watching them, observing their behavior. taking note of their attitudes. Every condescending comment, every dismissive glance, they weren't just mistakes. They were signs of a deeper problem, one that cut against everything Arch Motorcycle was supposed to stand for. Jake and Mark didn't realize it, but a storm was brewing, and Keanu, though calm and composed on the surface, was at the center of it. He wasn't here to be another customer to scoff at. He was here to remind them what this place was meant to be, a haven for passion, respect, and connection. And though he hadn't yet revealed his identity, his presence alone was enough to start shaking the foundation of their arrogance. As the moment stretched on, Jake and Mark's confidence began to waver. Their words, once sharp and cutting, now felt hollow. They had no idea who they were speaking to, but for the first time, they started to feel the weight of their own behavior. The atmosphere in the showroom was no longer filled with their laughter. Instead, it was heavy with something else, an unspoken realization that they had underestimated the man standing before them. Keanu didn't need to raise his voice or demand respect. He carried it with him, effortlessly, in the way he stood, the way he spoke, and the way he watched them with quiet intensity. And as he lingered near the counter, Jake and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being tested. Keanu's patience, steadfast throughout the exchange, had finally reached its limit. The soft hum of the showroom seemed to amplify Jake's mocking tone as he leaned back in his chair, making yet another thoughtless joke at a past customer's expense. This time, Keanu wasn't content to simply observe. The time for silence had passed. With deliberate steps, he approached the counter, every movement purposeful and composed. The weight of his presence was undeniable. He didn't need to raise his voice or show aggression. The confidence in his stride alone commanded attention. Jake and Mark straightened instinctively, their casual bravado cracking under the intensity of Keanu's quiet authority. Keanu fixed his calm yet piercing gaze on the two men, his words measured and deliberate. "You're quick to judge people," he began, his tone carrying a steady resolve. "Quick to mock what they don't know or how they look. But let me tell you something. Respect isn't a privilege you dole out to the people you think deserve it. It's something you offer freely, to everyone." The room fell silent, Keanu's words reverberating like the crash of distant thunder. For a moment, Jake and Mark sat frozen, their once confident smirks now faltering. Doubt crept into their expressions, softening their cocky postures. They exchanged uneasy glances, as if searching for a response that could diffuse the intensity of the moment. But none came. Jake shifted uncomfortably, the weight of Keanu's words pressing down harder than he expected. He tried to dismiss it with a shrug, but the lingering tension in the air betrayed his unease. Mark, ever the more defiant of the two, attempted to salvage his cool demeanor, letting out a nervous laugh. He waved a hand dismissively. "Relax, man," he said, forcing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We were just having a little fun. You're taking this way too seriously." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. He turned his attention to Mark, his expression steady yet filled with meaning. "Fun?" he repeated, his voice low but brimming with conviction. "Mocking someone for not knowing something? Ridiculing them because they don't look the part? That's not fun, that's arrogance. And it has no place here." Mark's grin faded entirely as Keanu's words cut through the fragile wall of indifference he had been trying to maintain. Jake, for his part, sat quietly, his bravado drained. Both men looked at each other, their earlier confidence replaced with the discomfort of reflection. Keanu let the silence linger, giving his words time to sink in. He could see the dawning awareness in their eyes, the faint but unmistakable realization that their behavior wasn't harmless, that it spoke to something deeper, something wrong. But Keanu wasn't finished. He continued, his tone calm but unyielding. "This isn't just about bikes," he said, gesturing to the gleaming machines surrounding them. "This is about the people who walk through those doors. Some are seasoned riders who live and breathe motorcycles. Others are first-timers, nervous but excited to learn. Each of them deserves respect, because that's what this place is about. It's not just a showroom. It's a space built on passion and trust. And you can't build that by tearing people down." Jake shifted in his seat again, his earlier bravado now fully replaced by something more vulnerable, shame. He scratched the back of his neck, struggling to find the words to respond. Finally, he muttered, "Okay, maybe we went a little too far." Mark, always the tougher of the two, seemed to wrestle with his pride. He looked away, his jaw tightening, but the guilt in his expression was unmistakable. "We didn't mean anything by it," he mumbled, though the excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears. Keanu watched them carefully, his gaze steady but not unkind. "It's not about what you meant," he said. "It's about what you did. Your words have power. They can make someone feel small, or they can make them feel welcome. That choice is yours, but it reflects who you are." For the first time, Jake and Mark truly heard him. His words weren't just criticism, they were a challenge, a call to be better. Jake nodded slowly, his defenses lowering. "You're right," he said, his voice softer now. "We shouldn't have acted like that." Mark hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. "Yeah," he added, glancing at Keanu with a flicker of sincerity. "We'll do better." Keanu nodded in return, but he wasn't ready to let them off the hook completely. "Apologies are a start," he said, his tone firm yet forgiving. "But what matters is what you do next. Respect isn't a one-time act. It's how you show up every day." The atmosphere in the showroom shifted once again, but this time, it wasn't tension that filled the room, it was reflection. Jake and Mark sat quietly, their earlier bravado replaced with a humbler energy. They weren't just employees anymore. They were two men who had been called to question their values, to look in the mirror and ask themselves who they wanted to be. Keanu took a step back from the counter, letting the lesson settle. He didn't need to say anything more. The silence spoke for itself. As he turned to leave, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. "Remember," he said, his voice steady but warm, "it's not about the bikes. It's about the people who walk through that door. Treat them with the respect they deserve, and you'll build something far greater than a sale." With that, he left the showroom, his quiet authority lingering in his absence. Jake and Mark exchanged a look, the weight of his words heavy on their minds. They didn't need to speak to understand what had just happened. They had been given a wake-up call, one they wouldn't forget. And as they prepared to greet the next customer, something had changed. They weren't just employees anymore. They were learners, ready to carry forward the lesson Keanu had given them. And in that moment, Arch Motorcycle became more than just a showroom. It became a testament to respect, to humility, and to the power of a second chance. The weight of Keanu's words settled over the room like a storm cloud. What had been an atmosphere of misplaced confidence and condescension was now eerily quiet. Jake fidgeted, his usual cocky demeanor slipping away as he grappled with the shift in power. His voice, no longer brash, broke the silence. "Why do you even care so much?" he asked, the question laced with genuine confusion and an undercurrent of unease. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. He allowed the question to linger for a moment, his expression softening, not with leniency, but with the resolve of someone who had long understood the importance of respect. His lips curved into a faint, measured smile, one that held a balance of disappointment and restrained hope. "Because," Keanu replied, his voice steady but infused with emotion, "this place is more than just a business to me. Every bike you see here, every detail in this room, it's a reflection of respect. Respect for the craft. Respect for the people who trust us. That's the foundation this place was built on." The words landed with the force of a hammer blow. Jake's eyes widened, his breath catching as the weight of what Keanu had just revealed began to register. Mark, who had been leaning against the counter in an attempt to maintain his bravado, straightened abruptly, his jaw slack. Both men turned to Keanu with expressions that mixed disbelief and a dawning sense of shame. "You're," Jake started, his voice faltering as the pieces fell into place. "You're him, aren't you?" Keanu didn't need to confirm it. The truth was evident in his presence, his conviction. This wasn't just some quiet customer who had wandered into the showroom. This was Keanu Reeves, the founder of Arch Motorcycle, the man whose passion had created the very place they worked, and the man they had so thoughtlessly disrespected with their behavior. Mark's face flushed as he looked down, unable to meet Keanu's eyes. His earlier confidence had crumbled entirely, leaving only the stark realization of his own actions. We didn't know," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Keanu's steady gaze softened slightly, but his words remained firm. It shouldn't matter if you knew or not. Respect doesn't depend on who someone is or what they've achieved. It's about how you treat every person who walks through that door. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, charged with reflection and regret. Jake and Mark exchanged glances, their earlier arrogance now replaced with the uncomfortable but necessary weight of introspection. The realization that they had mocked not only a customer, but also the values their workplace was meant to uphold hit them hard. Jake, visibly shaken, cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he said, the sincerity in his voice undeniable. We didn't mean to act like that. We were just messing around. Mark nodded hesitantly. Yeah, it was wrong. I see that now, he added, his tone subdued. Keanu regarded them silently, letting the moment stretch. He could see the regret in their eyes, the beginnings of understanding, but he knew that words alone weren't enough. Change wasn't about apologies, it was about action. It's not just about saying you're sorry, Keanu said, his tone softer now, but no less resolute. It's about making the choice to do better every day. Treat people with dignity, with kindness. That's how you build something meaningful, not just here, but in life. His words were a gift, a lesson not meant to shame them, but to inspire growth. And though Jake and Mark had started the day filled with misplaced pride, they were ending it humbled, aware that they had been given a second chance. As Keanu turned to leave, he paused at the door, glancing back at the two men one final time. Remember, he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength. Respect isn't about who you think someone is. It's about who you choose to be. With that, he stepped out of the showroom, leaving Jake and Mark standing in the silence of their own reflection. The air was different now, not heavy with mockery, but charged with the possibility of change. For the first time, they understood that their actions didn't just affect the business, they shaped who they were as people. Later that afternoon, a customer walked into the showroom, a man in his late 30s, dressed casually, his nervousness evident as he browsed the bikes. Jake and Mark exchanged a glance, their earlier arrogance replaced with a quiet determination. They approached the man, their voices warm, their demeanor respectful. Hey, welcome to Arch Motorcycle, Jake said, his tone genuine. Let us know if you have any questions or need help with anything. The man looked surprised but smiled, nodding as he continued to browse. For Jake and Mark, it wasn't about making a sale, it was about making the customer feel valued. And as the man left with a new bike and a grateful handshake, they knew they had taken the first step toward redemption. Keanu's words stayed with them long after he left, echoing in their minds like a guiding principle. They had been given more than a lesson, they had been given a chance to become better, not just as employees, but as people. And as the sun set on Arch Motorcycle, the showroom wasn't just a place of business anymore. It had become a place where respect was the foundation, and every interaction carried the potential to inspire. For Jake and Mark, the journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. And in the quiet hum of the shop, they found something they hadn't expected, a newfound sense of purpose and pride in the values they now upheld. Jake's voice faltered as he tried to find the right words. The swagger he once carried completely gone. I didn't know, he mumbled, each syllable weighed down by shame. I didn't realize it was you. I'm sorry. His words, though rushed and uneven, were laced with a raw sincerity that hadn't been there before. Beside him, Mark shifted uncomfortably, his bravado slipping away like sand through his fingers. He avoided Keanu's gaze, his usual cocky demeanor nowhere to be found. Yeah, man, he muttered, his voice low and almost apologetic. We didn't mean anything by it. We were just, messing around. Keanu stood still, letting the room settle into an almost unbearable silence. His expression was calm, but it was clear he wasn't dismissing their apologies so easily. He wasn't angry, that wasn't his style, but there was a profound disappointment in his eyes that cut deeper than any harsh words ever could. It was the kind of disappointment that didn't need to be shouted to be felt. It's not about whether or not you knew who I am, Keanu finally said, his voice quiet yet resonant, each word spoken with deliberate care. That's not the point. He paused, his gaze shifting between the two men, ensuring his words landed. It's about how you choose to treat people. Every customer who walks through that door deserves your respect, not because of who they are or what they know, but because of who you are. The words hit like a lightning bolt, electrifying the atmosphere. Jake swallowed hard, the reality of what Keanu was saying settling over him like a heavy weight. It wasn't just an offhand reprimand, it was a challenge to be better, to rise above the careless arrogance they had been so comfortable in. Mark's shoulders slumped as if the gravity of Keanu's message had physically pulled him down. Neither of them dared to speak, their earlier defiance now replaced with silent reflection. Keanu didn't press them. He allowed the silence to stretch, giving them space to process the gravity of the moment. But his presence, calm yet commanding, was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the authority of being the owner of the dealership, it was the authenticity in his voice, the clear conviction behind his words. He wasn't there to scold them, he was there to guide them towards something better. Mark, usually the more stubborn of the two, finally broke the silence. "I guess we just didn't think," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were trying to have fun, but now I see it wasn't right." His eyes met Keanu's for the briefest moment before darting away again. "I'm sorry." Jake nodded quickly, his own guilt evident. "Yeah, me too. I didn't realize how bad it came across. I get it now." Keanu exhaled slowly, his expression softening just enough to show he appreciated their honesty. "Apologies are a start," he said gently, "but change doesn't come from words alone. It comes from the choices you make moving forward. Every interaction is an opportunity to lift someone up, to make them feel valued. That's the kind of place I wanted to build here, and it's the kind of people I need to help me build it." The depth of his words hung in the air, the kind of lesson that lingered long after it was spoken. Jake and Mark nodded silently, their heads slightly bowed, their egos stripped away. They had started the day with misplaced confidence, but now they stood humbled, facing the hard truth that respect wasn't just a requirement of their job, it was a reflection of their character. Keanu turned his attention to the showroom around him, his gaze falling on the bikes that represented more than just machines. They were symbols of passion, dedication, and connection. "This place isn't just about selling bikes," he continued, his voice steady and heartfelt. "It's about creating a space where people feel like they belong, where they're seen, heard, and respected." As Keanu stepped back toward the showroom floor, he stopped and turned once more, his eyes meeting theirs with unwavering sincerity. "You don't have to be perfect," he said, his tone carrying both compassion and resolve. "But you do have to care. That's how you'll grow, not just as employees, but as people." Jake and Mark exchanged a glance, and for the first time, their expressions weren't filled with defensiveness or embarrassment. Instead, there was a quiet determination, a shared understanding that they had a choice to make. It wasn't about earning Keanu's forgiveness, it was about earning their own self-respect. Later that day, the door to the showroom opened, and a new customer walked in. The man looked unsure, his posture hesitant as he scanned the rows of gleaming motorcycles. Jake and Mark, standing behind the counter, exchanged a brief look, but this time, there was no mocking smirk, no dismissive glance. "Hey, welcome to Arch Motorcycle," Jake said warmly, stepping forward with a genuine smile. "Let us know if there's anything we can help you with." Mark followed suit, his tone equally kind. "Take your time looking around. These bikes are something special, and we're happy to answer any questions." The man's face lit up, his initial hesitation melting away as he engaged with them. By the time he left, smiling and thanking them for their patience, it was clear that something had shifted. Jake and Mark weren't just selling a bike. They were creating an experience, one built on respect and connection. Keanu's words stayed with them long after he left the showroom. They weren't just a reprimand, they were a gift, a chance to reevaluate not only how they worked but how they lived. And in the quiet moments of reflection that followed, Jake and Mark realized something profound. Respect wasn't a transaction. It was a choice, one that shaped every interaction, every relationship. The bikes in the showroom remained as sleek and stunning as ever, but the real transformation had happened in the people who sold them. And as Jake and Mark continued their journey, They carried with them the lesson that Keanu had so gracefully imparted, a lesson not just about motorcycles, but about life itself. Keanu turned to leave, his task seemingly complete. But at the door, he paused and glanced back. "Remember this," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "It's not about how much you sell or how much you know. It's about how you make people feel. That's what matters." As the door closed behind him, Jake and Mark stood in stunned silence. His words lingered, planting a seed of reflection they couldn't ignore. For the first time, they saw their behavior for what it was, not just unprofessional, but deeply disrespectful. Later that day, a customer walked into the showroom, a man in his 30s, dressed casually, with an unsure expression. Jake and Mark exchanged a glance, but this time, there were no smirks, no mocking comments. Instead, they greeted the man warmly, offering genuine assistance and taking the time to answer his questions. When the man left with a smile, shaking their hands in gratitude, Jake and Mark felt something they hadn't felt before, a sense of pride that came from treating someone with dignity. Keanu's visit had left a lasting impression, not just on Jake and Mark, but on the entire ethos of Arch Motorcycle. It wasn't about selling bikes, it was about creating an environment of respect and trust. And as the two men reflected on their second chance, they realized they hadn't just become better employees, they had become better people. Because in the end, it wasn't the motorcycles that defined Arch, it was the respect that fueled it.